up, everyone? Let's get dangerous.
This is so good.
I know.
It feels so right.
It's Jake Ciely.
Opening our minds to new ideas. Kill him!
Who is that guy?
Your mama. You just made the list.
Oh, wait, you're serious? Let me laugh even harder.
It's all in fantasy. Please of the range.
Sure, we talk about it all the time. Really? No. Burn.
Game on, everybody. It is on fantasy, and it is time. I mean, it's been too long, but, I had to have one of my favorites on the show. So that means another no Chris Meany on the ranking show this week because it's been too long since we've talked to Rich Hribar at Lord Reeves, one of the best in the business. I think one of the other people who doesn't sleep between Sunday and Wednesday and finally gets some on Thursday, maybe in the afternoon nap before Thursday Night Football comes around, because he knows every important stat you need to know. If you haven't checked him out over at Sharp Football, look, I can't recommend it enough. He knows I read it. He knows I check in. It covers every single game in depth with all the stats you need. And he's a gamer and a pop culturist, as you can see if you're watching later on YouTube behind him with the Spider-Man behind him, which I love, by the way, that you got that print from the movie. And he actually, Last of Us print, I see that one too. See the Spider-Man off to the side. You got a couple things. It's not as robust as behind me, but you got the important ones. But yeah, at Lord Reeves, thank you for doing this, by the way, because I know we are supremely slammed during the season. So I appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, it's early in the week's tough, but later in the week, like you said, Thursday, Friday, there's a couple windows where we can sneak some stuff in. So I'm glad to kind of catch up and share some of my musings. We're here. The first month's almost over. We're at the end of September already.
I know, week 4 already. But that's what we're here to talk about, to make sure you get the wins. And if you're in a 3-0, get that 4th. If you're 0-3, get the 1st. Just like Daniel Jones. Potentially, if you've already listened to this or haven't listened to this and Thursday Night Football already happened, then you already know the result. We're not talking Thursday Night Football. We're talking about a lot of situations you might have to deal with for week 4. And right off the top, look, we know the Dolphins are not as good without Tua. There's no question about it. The numbers, I actually tweeted this out before this even happened, and it got worse with last game, but Tyreek Hill without Tua, 7 points per game fewer. Jalen Waddle becomes a wide receiver 5. We saw what happened at Achane in that game with the offense struggling. There's talks that Tyler Huntley could be under center for week 4. We know who Tyler Huntley is. He's going to be better than Skylar Thompson, Rich. But, are we forced into the corner of having to start Achane and Tyreek Hill, but also we can stop there? Like we can actually bench Waddle, or do you have a little bit more hope than maybe it seems on the surface for Tyler Huntley if he is under center?
We have to have at least a smidge more hope, a ray of optimism, right? I mean, this is a Pro Bowl Tyler Huntley. It's one of my favorite things about Tyler Huntley is he made the Pro Bowl that year. Feels like 35 people must have rejected.
I was gonna say there's only 6 people left that didn't have.
Yes. He's like, yeah, I'll go. I'll absolutely do that. But I mean, Skylar Thompson. It's weird because when you go back to the situation in the offseason, a lot of us from the outside looking in are like, shame on you, Dolphins. Like, how did you not know better, right? Like, you have this situation with Tua and you roll into the season with no clear backup. We had already seen Skylar Thompson as a rookie. What did they know that we didn't know, right? So that's what I said last week. It's like, what do they know about Skylar Thompson that they were willing to just say, all right, we're comfortable with him as our backup again. So I was like, all right, last week, let's see if he looks any better. No, it did not happen at all. His awareness is just, it's absolutely terrible. He gets injured. Then the ghost of Tim Boyle comes back in. Remember Black Friday from last year. Absolute miserable quarterback play. So we have to hope it's just a little bit better, but we now have a 535 play sample under Mike McDaniel where Tua has not been on the field. The Dolphins average 4.8 yards per play with Tua at 6.4 yards per play. In context, that is the difference of being number 1 in the NFL in yards per play over that span to being dead last. So there's no middle ground. There's just been no middle ground. And, it's funny when you look at Tua because he gets knocked for being a system quarterback. Well, guess what? He is the system right now. No matter what you think about Tua, he has been the system. Because when Tua is off the field, it also exposes that offensive line that is not good because the ball doesn't come out as fast and none of those guys can block. So at least we get Huntley who can move. So, I mean, if you're in a 2 QB league, Tyler Huntley at least becomes an option. He's averaged 42 rushing yards per game in his starts, but he's only since he entered the NFL, he's 62nd out of 70 quarterbacks in yards per pass attempt that have thrown 100 more passes. So are we getting like a big bump? It's tough to say. I will say on the Huntley side, though, there's optimism for him, though, too, because when you go back to his NFL sample, when he's filled in with the Ravens, these are the players he's thrown double-digit passes to in the NFL. Obviously, Mark Andrews, pretty good player. Then it's Demarcus Robinson next, Isaiah Likely, and then a very aged-out Deshaun Jackson. That's it. So at least he's going to have better players to throw the football to, we think. So we just have to hope, because I don't know what you do. Like you said, if you have an option, maybe you luck boxed into a wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5, you drafted wide receiver heavy, and you're like, all right, I want to see Huntley. I'm going to bench Tyreek. I'm going to bench Waddle. Achan's a little trickier because running backs already urged.
Yeah.
Running back getting catches the football. It's just hard to kind of sit him, but I do think he becomes a volatile fantasy play. They have a week 5, 6 bye.
Yeah, let me give you 2 toss-ups here.
Let
me say, Tyreek Hill with Tyler Huntley, assumably. If it's Tim Boyle, I mean, we're having a whole completely different conversation. It's moving down. But let's say Tyreek Hill in this game, or if you happen to be buying low or weighted on T. Higgins against Carolina. Like, is that the range we should be talking about? Or are you not even entertaining that and you're like, no, this is Tyreek Hill, you're going too far. Like, I'm not even Juwan Jennings with no Deebo Samuel. Like, is that the conversation, or is that too far for you?
I would probably entertain T. Higgins for sure.
Okay.
There's definitely touchdown potential. I think that game environment now with Bryce Young off the field could be a little fun. I mean, here's the Tyreek back-to-back weeks. He's been outside of the top 50. You have to go back to his first 3 career NFL games to find a time he was outside of the top 50 back-to-back weeks. He is good enough. And we have to think the 16% target share is that's just too low. Like, we have to assume that's going to go up, but that game environment could just be bad. I mean, with Will Levis, with Brian, his head coach is literally calling him like dumb, like, a little bit verbatim, but like, that's kind of what he said, like, to the public.
We need to get the 4th image of Will Levis to complete the quad picture. We've got 3 great ones. We need a 4th one to complete it this week.
I mean, he's got 8 turnovers. So that game environment could just be kind of bad. And if Huntley's running around, maybe it's just not a lot of targets. So I think that's at least the area where I'm like, all right, I can make upside case for T. Higgins for sure.
Okay, well then the Jalen Waddle area where I have him, let's see if you think this is a fair range for him, or you think it should be higher or even lower. So I have Jalen Waddle in the mix of the 40s with DeAndre Hopkins, Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton, Christian Watson. If we get Jordan Love back, like, that's the range I have Waddle in. Does that feel right, or should he be up more by, in your opinion, the Christian Kirks or McConkey's, or even lower in like a Brandon Cooks or Michael Wilson?
No, I like him in like the Christian Watson area, right? Like the because he's capable of a big play, but do we get the targets? A lot of volatility. It could be if Waddle gets there, he probably makes a big play, and then he probably does a little bit like outside of it. That's really it. So I think that's the right area. I would definitely entertain guys like, if I like Jaxon, Smith-Njigba, right? Like a guy that you might not have been started and drafted as your wide receiver 4 or 5 is in a better spot than him this week. Maybe like a Brian Thomas Jr.
You know what? I didn't put this as something to talk about. You just made me think of it. But let's bring up Smith-Njigba for a second here. And I know Rich is good enough to pivot on the spot.
Yeah.
Like this, one of the best here is so I kind of, and it ties into what was going to be. We're going to come back to the Titans game because the wide receivers the whole scenario I'm about to lay out for everybody. If you've read my column, I feel like Smith-Njigba and Lockett, or what we're about to talk about with Pollard and Spears, is like, I don't think either one of them are going away. And unfortunately for us in fantasy, that's frustrating. Like, we want Smith-Njigba, but we have one really good game of Smith-Njigba, and in that game, Tyler Lockett wasn't 100%. We have a really good game of Lockett, and then we have week 3 where they both did kind of okay. And I'm kind of like, I don't want to do this to you because it's going to be Seahawks and then Titans, but it's kind of the same thing for Pollard and Spears. It was 1 week of all Pollard and barely any Spears. It was another week of Spears all in the passing game and ended up having the better game. And then week 3, it was drives. So I want to pull these two together because I think the problem is people don't want to see us as fantasy analysts being like, there is no clear answer. Like, this is just what you're going to have to live with. But has there been something as you dug through the stats with the Titans running backs or with the Seahawks wide receivers that at least gave you a little bit of a glimmer of like, maybe this is something we can chase to try and make it a little bit more predictable?
I think just on an individual basis, you're going to have to kind of play a little bit of the matchup game and kind of find like the game scripts that where these guys stand out. I think particularly like this week, like Jaxon Smith-Njigba does have a few keys that I think point to him being more involved in the offense this week from a target perspective. Because like you said, it's just going to oscillate. Like it's going to be really frustrating. A lot of people use like the phrase better in a best ball as kind of a crutch, but like these are the types of guys, like you're going to be really frustrated because you're going to have these guys on the bench. Like week 2, probably not a lot of people play Jaxon Smith-Njigba, right? And you get the 12 catches and you're frustrated. So then you chase it, right? You're like, oh, you had it. It's back. You put him in your lineup week 3, doesn't get any targets. You're like, well, and then now what do I do this week? But in particular, this individual game, I think there's signal here. Well, one, he's run the most routes of the Seattle wide receivers. So you do like that. Ryan Grubb's playing a lot more 11 personnel than they did last year. And then just this in particular matchup, nobody runs on the Lions. Like nobody. You go back to last year in the regular season, no running back has even rushed for 70 yards against them in a game.
You want something for that real quick? So I have adjusted points allowed over the site. A lot of sites do this. Yeah. But for my formula, just to give you an idea, so the league average for running backs, this is for everybody out there, entire backfield league average given up. It's 19.6. To give you an idea, the Detroit Lions are obviously the worst matchup you could possibly find. It's 11.7, which is almost 8 full fantasy points per game fewer than what the league average should give up. And second worst is Kansas City, and they're at minus 5.3. So they're almost 3 points behind how bad the Lions are. So I just want to throw that out there for everybody that might be feeling really good about Charbonnet after last week. Yeah,
absolutely. So, I mean, it's going to be a pass script. Also, the Lions now have made a couple adjustments defensively. Obviously they add Carlton Davis, they draft Taron Arnold. They've been a little bit better on the outside, but Aiden Hutchinson has been an absolute demon through 3 weeks. The ball is coming out fast against the Lions, and this Seattle offensive line, I still have a lot of questions about. So they are giving up a lot of production to slot receivers. Now, JSN is not Cooper Kupp or Chris Godwin, but I mean, obviously, I think the ball is going to come out fast in this game. So I do think if you're going to chase JSN, this would be kind of a spot to say like, all right, there's enough signal here for me. If I'm in kind of a dire spots, I've been staring at my bench. Is this a week to get him right? I definitely think that's a spot for him. The Titans backfield is a little trickier because, Brian Callahan has talked about offseason, they kind of labeled these guys, though the word they used was interchangeable. And we haven't really seen that yet. It has been more Tony Pollard than Tajay Spears. Even last week, even though nobody had touches, it was still 60% of the touches for Tony Pollard. Right. That was his lowest backfield share of the 3 weeks this season. But we're not getting enough standalone value from Tajay Spears to like really feel good about. He's like basically a bump up from like Chase Brown and like the role he's in right now. He's not getting like any money touches. He's not getting any like short down and distance stuff where if they were to get inside the 5, we could maybe luck box and do a touchdown, right? And that's kind of what we want. And so it's really tricky to kind of put him in the lineup. So Brian Callahan also said after the game, they continued to want to tighten up that split. So does it continue to be like a 1A, 1B thing? Do we see Spears get more work? Spears was the better player last week, but Pollard did nothing wrong the first 2 weeks. Like he was fine. And then just the offense did absolutely nothing out of the backfield last week. So it's another spot where I think you have to pick and choose. But right now, Pollard would be like the lean to say, like, if you have to play like an RB2 flex type of guy, because he's the guy that's gotten the touches like inside the 5. And that's kind of what we care about, at least in terms of fantasy football. Just if we get it, just getting lucky in these types of splits. There's a few of these developing. I think we're going to probably see the Tampa Bay situation devolve into this. It's kind of been trending that way. But the thing about that, the thing about Bucky Irving though, is if he just takes over cuts into Rachaad White's rushing role, does he just end up with like making the situation kind of unusable for gamers as well? Because we haven't seen him get any touches inside the 10, and Rachaad White is still an active receiver. Well, this year.
This is why I kept making the comparison. I say I'm so happy about this. It's been a little tongue in cheek. I did a joking victory lap on Tuesday with Meanie because this entire preseason I was like, Bucky Irving is a bad news sign for Rachaad White. I kept saying that. And that's coming from somebody who was all over Rachaad White in preseason last year. I'm only saying that not the victory lap, I'm just, the context being I supported Rachaad White last year, and now I said this was a threat this year. But I agree with you. And I said, don't take my joking and go run with that, because what I think, and I'll see if you agree on this, what I keep saying is I think this is going to be Steelers 2023 is Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren. We want the more explosive one, but that doesn't mean it's always going to be the better game, and it doesn't mean it's always going to be more productive, especially when Najee Harris / Rachaad White is getting the carries that you just brought up at the goal line.
Yeah, and that's going to be the tricky part. Like Bucky Irving's ascendance versus, the continued ineptitude rushing the football with Rachaad White just gives him access to more of the touches we kind of really don't want for fantasy football. I mean, we obviously will take touches, but like we want targets and goal line touches. Like that's what we want. Like, so if Bucky Irving's just getting like in between the 20s, like grunt work, and he has to rip big runs, like Jaylen Warren's a great example, right? And he's probably going to catch fewer passes than Jaylen Warren caught last year. So, because Rachaad White's not going away in the passing game for sure. Like we kind of have a good idea about that. Your hope is that Bucky Irving is good enough as an interior runner to kind of thwart Rachaad White at the goal line. But this is a team now for 17 weeks last year and 3 weeks this year. They're not giving you any rushing touchdowns anyways. Like this, so it's like, it's just a really tough spot. I have no problem with anyone like that needs running backs grabbing a body like Bucky Irving. But I do think if you think Bucky Irving is going to take over as like a really dependable like RB2 in fantasy, I don't think that's also going to happen either while Rachaad White's active.
Yeah, and I'm with you. And that's why I think as much as I can celebrate being excited about Irving, I also think there's potential sell high because people are going crazy right now for him because they also see the big plays and they're like, oh, he's averaging so many more yards per carry. But you know who's not averaging any yards per carry at all is the entire Broncos backfield. Actually, unless it's Tyler Batty in the fourth quarter when they're playing grind out the clock because it's garbage time and they're not even playing against the first team defense. Throwing that out aside, I had a huge argument with Meany, and he's like, no, I still want to hang on to Javonte Williams. And here's why I said no, is because it's the example. I use this every single year. You used it earlier with the wide receivers. It's the chasing your tail. I say there's certain situations where you're always chasing your tail because you brought it up. It's like, oh, I missed the good game, so now I go to that player. And then he has a bad game. And now you're like, well, now what do I do? If there's two good games in a row, okay, maybe you get the third, but it's kind of different when you have the Broncos because now we've already got a setup of 3 weeks where it's like, well, if Javonte Williams goes this week and goes off, he's going to be on your bench. If he goes off, you're still going to hesitate in week 5. And then you're going through this whole circle of like you're always chasing the production. And there's 3 people involved. And it doesn't even matter that there's 3 because the offense sucks. It's Bo Nix. It's Bo Nix and maybe some Courtland Sutton. So here's what I said is I'm dropping Williams. I'm dropping anybody involved in the backfield. And I brought this up with the Swift situation and the Brown situation is like, I'm dropping them even possibly as a sabotage because you're not going to know when to start them. So let somebody else put them in their lineup and get that whopping 2.3 points and they deal with the problem.
Yeah, I don't mind that. This is a situation that I was kind of avoiding coming into the offseason because Sean Payton has always rotated players, like especially in the backfield. And Javonte Williams, there's a place in the multiverse where he doesn't have that injury and he's as much of a tackle breaker as he was his first 2 years because he's just been sapped. I mean, he's not creating anything after contact. And also, the Broncos lost Mike McGlinchey, he's still on Irish. Like the offensive line is down real bad. The backfield's down real bad. They're rotating guys. Javonte Williams is going to continue to get snaps because he's good in pass protection. So like they're going to use him on the field, but he's again, just not a guy like when are you ever going to be scared when you go and load up your lineup and you're like, all right, we're heading to Thursday Night Football. Let me see who my opponent has. And they've got Javonte Williams in their lineup. You're never gonna be like, I'm going to lose because of Javonte Williams, right? Like you're never going to feel that fear in your heart. And I like that idea. We're developing into a number of these backfields now as we get through this first month, where it's hard to see, like the Raiders are another one. Like it's, especially last week, you brought up the Bears, both of those teams had like great matchups last week. And it's like, all right, if you can't do it here, how are we supposed to have faith? And they did it. They both failed the test again last week. So guys like Zamir White, like let someone else deal with that. Like I'm completely for that at 100%. We're going to continue to see McLaughlin mixed in. Who knows if Beatty gets, more work now just because he showed something in the fourth quarter. It's Sean Payton. He's shown that he's willing to be like nebulous. Outside of Cortland Sutton, the Broncos just play dudes. They just rotate guys.
It's legit. The wide receivers been this. It's legitimately been so many different. It was Veli the first week. It was Josh Reynolds the second week, and then it was Cortland Sutton the past week. I mean, Sutton has the 2 games of double-digit targets, but it's been 3 different people that have been. And I put this in heavy quotes: the most productive wide receiver. Yeah. So. A little bit of negativity. Let's turn this positive. And I'm going to kind of like just lay this question out for you because I just want to see how you respond. Are the Falcons fixed? That's not no added context. I just want to throw a question. Are the Falcons fixed?
I mean, not right now because that's offensive line. Like, I mean, you lose Drew Dalman and you lose Caleb McGarry for an extended period of time. Like, that's not good, especially for Kirk Cousins, who obviously right now is at a stage of his career not if he didn't even have the Achilles, he's just not at a stage where he's mobile anymore. So he's he's a kind of a stationary quarterback. When you have these guys for fantasy, it's kind of tough because they have to get there like with multiple passing touchdowns every week. And they also still have Bijan Robinson. So it's like, is that going to be like a situation where we get a large run out, or like the Falcons going to be a team that kind of just like meanders their way through of getting, like low 20s in points. They score 2 to 3 touchdowns a game, and you have to hope that they're 2 of those are passing touchdowns or all 3 of them are passing touchdowns. That's kind of tough to kind of latch onto. I will say they did some good self-scouting. They've made adjustments, and maybe it was just a preseason thing because none of their starters played in the preseason. And week 1, they were 96% shotgun. I'm sure everyone's seen all the stuff. Then they've been under center 43% of the time the past 2 weeks. They're running more play action. They at least have made the adjustments, some calibration to have more production on offense. They still have probably a flatter target share than I think a lot of us assumed they were going to have coming into this year. Darnell Mooney has been a lot more productive than I probably assumed. They're still trying to figure out what to do with Kyle Pitts. I brought this up with Josh Norris in the offseason. Because the system, where Zach Robinson comes from, they've never really had a player like Kyle Pitts. And Arthur Smith's plan with Kyle Pitts was like, all right, I have a guy that is unlike all these other tight ends. I just want to have him kind of play wide receiver, and I'm going to play him outside. But the thing is Kyle Pitts is better than tight ends in that spot, but he's still not better than a wide receiver in that spot. And
I was just about to say that he's a lower level wide receiver and above average tight end. He's kind of stuck in this weird spot that they keep doing with him, and I think that's part of the reason.
But so like the closest thing we've had to like a really good tight end in this system and the iterations of it have been TJ Hawkinson and George Kittle, or 2 guys that play in line. The system wants to play an in-line tight end because everything's predicated off of running that outside zone. So Pitts is trying to find his way playing in line. So he's playing in line 56% of his snaps. It's by far the highest rate of his career. And, he's not earning targets over the middle of the field. They haven't really found him. So it's like, he's kind of in between like the area where he was with Arthur Smith. And now it's like, we kind of need like a marriage of both. And then, like I said, the targets are, I think, more spread out the Falcons than we assumed. Like Ray McLeod is like involved because this team plays a lot of 11 personnel inherently. So it's kind of tough. I think we're going to have spike weeks for Mooney because even London, you've got to feel good about, like, you got touchdowns the past 2 weeks, but hasn't hit 70 yards in a game yet. It's like, I don't know if we're going to get like that full breakout for London either. I think they're going to kind of be okay. Like that's, they're just, I don't think it's fixed. I think it's just okay.
It's just okay. All right. Well, then let me see. And I agree with you, by the way.
Bijan's fine though.
Bijan's fine. And actually even better than we thought, because Algier, where he used to be kind of like, hey, maybe he's in this flex world where, like, if you're desperate, it's kind of leaning even more into Bijan, which is thank you. Goodbye, Arthur Smith. But I'm still a little hesitant, basically like what you said on the Kyle Pitts side of things, although it's tight end. So, I mean, inherently he's top 10 just because it's tight end. All right, so then we brought up Andy Dalton briefly in the other conversation, so let's say the same with them. Is Andy Dalton just fixing the Panthers? Because it's funny, and you know what? I'm going to partly answer this for you, or at least for me. And when it comes to this, Rich, I said this to Meanie. Everybody's celebrating Andy Dalton, and I think it's funny because everybody's like, I have Deontay Johnson in a lot of spots. I drafted him in the top 25. This is what I was expecting, a volume. You heard it, the reports. What is the offensive game plan? This is legitimately what was said by Dave Canales this preseason. What's the game plan? The answer was, where is Deontay? Like, you remember that? You remember it was like, all it was Bryce Young has to look for Deontay, has to look for Deontay, has to look for Deontay. And of course, Bryce Young is failing as an NFL quarterback, and Dalton comes in and quote unquote fixes everything. And I said, whoa, hold on. Let's not forget 2022 like it just didn't happen in recent history with the Saints. And then Andy Dalton still has 140 yards and 1 touchdown. Some mistakes, can't get out when the pressure's in his face the entire game, starts to struggle a little bit because he's Andy Dalton at this point of his career on top of it. So while I think it's fixed, and yay, Deontay Johnson, and of course the Thielen injury kind of helps Deontay with the volume, but I don't think we're ready to put him inside the top 20, at least in my opinion. I don't know where you are, but also this comes to Hubbard as well, and people are excited for Hubbard, but I also don't think Hubbard's necessarily like top 20 is either. I still think they fall into what their pre-draft values are, which were in the 20s. Are you with me, or you have a little bit more positive outlook than I do?
I mean, so when they made this change, it was kind of like, we just want to try to gauge where the baseline is for this offense. I mean, Bryce Young was playing so poorly that we couldn't evaluate anyone on the offense.
Right.
Dave Canales obviously comes in with the cachet of he helped revive Geno Smith's career and then Baker Mayfield's career. So I was like, could he do it with Bryce Young? And the answer is probably not. No, he didn't fix Bryce Young. Well, I guess TBD, maybe he'll come back and we'll see this.
At least not yet.
We just wanted to see if Andy Dalton could perform at a competent level so we could see what we had. Because a lot of gamers have been holding Jonathan Brooks, right? Like, this is the big reveal, was like, because if you had Jonathan Brooks through 2 weeks, you were like, oh my God, like I mean, this guy's on my IR, or you're holding him on a roster spot without IR spots. And you're like, dude, I might have a rock. Like, this is a paperweight. And at least now you're like, all right, I can come back and see something. But then Dalton like exceeded expectations that at least that I had in week 1. I was just looking for like competency. And then that was the most receiving yards Deontay Johnson's ever had in a game. It was the most yards from scrimmage Chuba Hubbard's ever had in a game of his career. So you have to feel at least like really optimistic. And from a system stance, you like it because what happened was the ball came out. Andy Dalton had the quickest time to throw in the NFL last week. When he threw the ball under 2.5 seconds, 22 of 29, 8.1 yards per pass attempt, 2 touchdowns. When Bryce Young was getting rid of the football in under 2.5 seconds, he was 31st in the NFL in rating, 4.3 yards per pass attempt. So like, it's, and I wonder too, if like the current defensive meta and where we are offensively, it's not a coincidence we're seeing the revival of some of these like veteran quarterbacks like a Sam Darnold or Baker last year, or Geno. Like, I think there is some coincidence, these guys that can win in the pocket, because the biggest problem with some of the young quarterback struggles we've seen has been the pocket play, because there was a gap there where the NFL is transitioning and incorporating a lot of college concepts, like when the RPO came into the NFL game, and a lot of athletes were coming into the NFL from the college game, but they weren't winning as passers. And we're seeing that a problem. Like, Daniel Jones has been this way. We just talked about Will Levis. He's been in that capacity. So like, we have Bo Nix a little bit too. Like, we want guys that win in the pocket. And I think that that's not a coincidence that we're seeing a revival of some of these guys. Like when Flacco took over for Deshaun Watson last year, these guys that can win in the pocket are having success. So that actually is like a little bit of a pro, I think, in the cap here. Are you going to get 3 touchdowns from Andy Dalton and 9 yards of passing? Absolutely not. But you now have a level of confidence, especially in a guy like Deontay Johnson, who had 39% of the team targets. Through weeks 1 and 2, 42% of Deontay Johnson's targets were inaccurate. He had 1 inaccurate target last week. And it should have been a touchdown. Thanks, Andy. We should have had 2 where we missed him on that great play fake at the goal line. But so you're feeling good about Deontay Johnson. Am I going to like go into the bag and say, like, are you going to start Xavier Legette because Andy Dillon's out? Like, probably not, unless you're in a really 14 team, 16.
No, but I am excited for that.
Yeah, but he's going to get more run now. But I think the biggest winner though from all this, outside of, the obvious Deontay Johnson, is the gamers that were holding on to Jonathan Brooks, because you had to be terrified after 2 weeks. You're like, what do I even have when he comes back?
Well, so it's funny that it tied into there is something that I've used as an argument too, is when you said what the NFL is doing. And I spent this offseason, I wrote an article about the improvement or the increase in zone in the NFL. And that over the last 5 years, it's skyrocketed to the point where it's over 80% for league average. And you see so what I went for a deep dive on Jared Goff, and I watched back every single pass play from the Cardinals, and I saw it. I was like, they're running a hell of a lot of zone. I mean, they're just shelling the crap out of them. And I went back, and the Cardinals through the first 2 weeks were in the 60% range, which was league average for zone. And then week 3, over 80%. They're actually the second highest zone team, according to the site that I use. In week 3 against Jared Goff. And then I started watching back Jared Goff, and it's like, you know what's funny is like this year's teams are creating more of like that problem for him where it's like, you know what, we're going to go back to Jared Goff being forced to make decisions and finding those gaps in zone, which is I think ties into this whole point of the pocket passers. You need to be able to find those gaps, and the zone is creating problems for that. And when I went back at Goff, so that I'm spiraling into this whole conversation about Jared Goff because I just want to kind of almost even get your thoughts on this, is I compared it to something that happened. I don't know if you remember this, but back when he was with the Rams, Emory Hunt was the one that actually pointed it out to me before anybody else did. And then it kind of became common knowledge. The end of that 1 year where Jared Goff was on fire, and then like the last 4 or 5 games, he like fell on his face and was trash. You remember that, right? The thing that people figured out, and like I said, Emory was the first one to tell me, is like, watch what happens with defenses. Defenses started hiding their full formation until the headset clicked.
There's the Bears Vic Fangio game. Remember that?
Yeah. The headset clicks off, and it's like, oh, Jared Goff can't get fed information from McVay anymore. Now he has to figure it out on his own. So long story come all the way around on this is after watching the Cardinals and watching what teams are doing to the Lions right now, because my whole point of doing this was like, he actually has a second wide receiver. Jared Goff should be better, not worse. Jared Goff's indoors. We know Jared Goff indoors. So do you share any of this concern as I completely pivoted off the conversation we were having? It's like, do you have any of the similar concerns I have? Because it's clear to me, at least through 3 games, that with the zone defense people are running against Goff, is that maybe we have a Goff problem going forward for the passing game, and that when Laporta is healthy, maybe he's not even going to be the Laporta we knew. Maybe Jameson Williams is going to be more inconsistent than we had hoped. Maybe Amon-Ra St. Brown's going to be more consistent than we remember for last year because we have a Goff problem.
Well, Goff was on my like short list of guys if you got froze out of quarterback this year to target because of the opening schedule. You know, you open Rams, Bucks, and Cardinals. And he hasn't finished higher than QB 18 in any of those weeks. So that's like a disappointing thing from a matchup stance, is he's really kind of let down. And you again, he has to get their passing because he's not giving anything rushing. And the other thing that kind of ties into your point, like if you're going to drop back and play zone, the Lions are just going to run the football. That's what they did last week.
Yeah.
They're like,
they don't even pass as much.
We are more than happy to run the football down your throat. So that kind of is like an inverse thing. The Lions are tough from a real football stance. They're tough to defend that way though, because if you want to invite them to run, they'll gladly run all over you. They've got a good offensive line, although it looks like they're going to be down Frank Ragnow for a short period of time. In this matchup this week, it's interesting because they lose Frank Ragnow, but the Seahawks lose probably Leonard Williams and Byron Murphy. So it's kind of like a trade-off in the interior for both teams. But you just can't feel confident in using Goff as a fantasy asset because he's had 3 kind of the softer matchups that we want to target, and he hasn't even delivered as like a mid-range QB2 in that capacity. So he's tough to play. I think big picture, though, if you have Lions guys, like you still feel good about Amon-Ra. Laporta was always a guy that was overvalued just because someone had to be ranked tight end 1. Like, it's not his fault, really. Just like someone had to be ranked tight end 1. But if you go back to Laporta's rookie year, he only went over 60 yards 4 times. Like, he just had a bunch of touchdowns. So, like, when you don't get those touchdowns, and that's a tough world to live in. You've done this a long time. Like, you that guy that has the breakout touchdown season, it's always a red flag. It's like, all right, well, you're not going to probably get 10 touchdowns for me again next year. So what if we strip away 4 or 5 of those touchdowns as a safe like projection? Then what are you giving me? And you're like, damn it doesn't look very good. But then you're like, you have to start ranking tight ends, and you're like, well, who's going to be there? Like,
well, joke's on you and me, because I was like, oh, I'm still keeping Kelsey first. And then it's like, well, that didn't work out either.
Yeah. I mean, I just think the expectations, though, for Laporta are kind of like offset based on the reality of like how he got there as a rookie and then the context of the field. Because a lot of people talk about like tight end was deeper this year, but no one was like still like even the elite tight ends in context of taking tight ends 1 through 7. Like the earliest tight end was going off in round 3, round 4. It's not like anyone thought like all these guys were like hammers in years past.
Yeah.
We had. Like,
I've already joked Meany about it. Yeah. He said like tight ends deeper, and I laughed in his face in the preseason. I'm like, no, it's not. We've said this the last 10 years. As a quick sidebar, I'll tell you what I said on Tuesday. It's just the fact that the tight end, it actually kind of ties into Pitts. Tight end doesn't exist like tight end used to exist. Like tight ends aren't 100%, well, not even 100%, but you get my point. They aren't the pure inline tight ends from 10 to 20 years ago. Their positions, big slot, out wide. Like, honestly, big slot's probably the best way to put it. It's like so many of them are just big slots now. And it's like, yeah, they're still kind of in line sometimes. Like, it's just, but the tight end position of what we knew, like when you and I first started 10, 15, 20 years ago, that's a completely different NFL and world of what the tight end. Fullback still existed back then. Fullbacks don't exist anymore inherently. So I think that's part of it. It's just why it's like just tight ends aren't tight ends. I think a lot of them are falling into the Kyle Pitts problem where it's like, yeah, if I use you only as an inline tight end, you're better than anybody else. But the problem is we don't, and now you're not as good on that next level outside where we're trying to force you to be good. Like you said, with Kyle Pitts as a wide receiver.
Yeah. So right now through 3 weeks, there's been 13 touchdowns by tight ends. It's by far the fewest at any point of any NFL season that I have going back to the 2000s. The next lowest is 20 that happened in 2003. Like at this point last year, there was 25 receiving touchdowns from tight ends. So basically half. So it's running out badly. It's interesting because tight ends were getting more usage we talked about the increase of zone and middle of the field open. Tight ends were actually going up in targets. They were trending upwards. And then this year it's just kind of flatlined. I do think when you look at like the peripherals, like some guys still look fine from a usage stance, like just the production doesn't happen. It's 3 weeks. Like we're saying this, like there's stuff that's going to happen for 14 more weeks where we look back and say like, you remember that dude sucked for 3 weeks? We overreacted to that. Like there's gonna be a lot of that for sure. It's like I think guys like when you look at the surface, like Kelsey's usage has been fine. It's just the ascendance of Rashee Rice and then the increased push of Patrick Mahomes being kind of like a boring player for fantasy football.
I think the Chiefs are basically you haven't been on the show, but I've already said for everybody that's listening knows what I'm going to say. I compared it to the Golden State Warriors in their run. It's like they got to the point where all of a sudden it was like, yeah, we don't care for the first seed or the sixth seed or the fourth seed. It doesn't matter. We'll turn it on as we get close to the playoffs and win our championship. Come talk to us when it's week 15 is what the Chiefs like. I kind of feel like they're doing. They're basically, you've seen them, Reeves. They're playing like C-B- bowl and they're still winning. And I feel like they're just like, you know what? Let's just take it easy. We don't need to force it.
The worst thing was that just the development of that defense, man. Like them having a good defense sucks for us.
Oh, I've always had a soft spot for Spagnuolo, though. That's it. Yeah. You're not wrong. All right, so
because the defense was very suspect. And now, like the last 3 years, that defense has been awesome, and they're just killing teams with paper cuts. And Mahomes is still making more mistakes than we typically see him make, but they're killing teams with paper cuts. And stopping the opponent. So it's like they're really boring. They don't have anybody that can win downfield still because we haven't seen Xavier Worthy get like one real wide receiver target like yet. Yeah. I say that because he got the touchdown he scored in week 1 was a blown coverage, but like everything's still manufactured for him. Like we're not seeing hit like wins. We haven't seen through 3 weeks like Xavier Worthy run like a 12-yard dig and like be open and get a target or like run a slant, like or run a comeback. We haven't seen any.
And no teams are like, if you remember it too, like there's very few plays where you see defenses against the Chiefs where like they're in a 2 deep. Like that used to be what people tried to do and it failed and they just like, yeah, right. That's what I was going back to. They had that. And now if you watch it again, it's like, everything is just contained. Like I hate that you keep going back to the word, but their shell defense a lot of times. And I was saying this as a sidebar is the fact that like Xavier Worthy, I do think is an answer somewhat to help unlock the offense, but I don't think they really even need him to. But anyway, this was supposed to be Marquise Brown. You're supposed to be able to drop the secondary back a little bit, but they don't need to. Like even with, as you bring it up, as using Xavier Worthy, they're not even traditional wide receiver usage right now. And defense are just like, you know what? We'll play 20, 15 yards and up, and who cares? Because you're not going 40 yards over the top of us. So it's fine. So I want to stick with the Chiefs real quick. Kareem Hunt signed to the active roster. Is this just stay away, even though it's the Chiefs and it's so enviable, even as Carson Steele comes off a good game? Or you're like, you know what? I will give Carson Steele one more chance if I happen to take the flyer last week, because Kareem Hunt could just be the third option that gets 5 touches. Maybe we're just overrating and not remembering that Kareem Hunt kind of sucked last year. Yeah. So where are you with the Chiefs backfield?
I'm still my thought when Isaiah Pacheco went down that they were going to basically use Carson Steele as like kind of the early down guy, and then P. Ryan's role would just be like a little bit of an extension of what it was, and that's what happened for 1 week. Now Carson Steele from a fantasy stance, like he's in a role that we kind of alluded to in the type of split where like if he doesn't score a touchdown, you're kind of boned.
Yeah.
Because he's just not going to catch a lot of passes, and you're getting like just rushing attempts. I will say this is a spot. If you have Carson Steele, you should feel pretty optimistic about given the potential game script for this game. It sounds like Justin Herbert may try to play through this ankle injury, but also the Chargers are going to be without Rashawn Slater, without Joe Alt. They're going to be without Derwin James. Like this has like a boring 24-10 Chiefs win kind of written all over it, right? Like, so I mean, Carson.
Do you have J.K. Dobbins concerns this week? Sorry to like add a question.
Yeah. I mean, I would because potential game script also guy that doesn't catch passes. The two offensive linemen are down. The first 2 weeks, J.K. Dobbins lived off of long runs. And you look at last year, I mean, he had 5 rushes with Slater off the field last year, had 9 yards on those runs. Like the Chiefs aren't the Steelers, but you brought up the splits earlier with the adjusted points allowed to running backs. They have it even last week. They Bijan again, another banged up offensive line. Because we talked about the Falcons injuries. They held Bijan under 4 yards per carry. Last play that the Falcons ran had absolutely zero chance of success against them. So, I mean, I would be concerned about J.K. Dobbins. I think he's more of like a flex for me this week because you're just going to need him to get in the end zone to kind of salvage his line. But looking at the potential game script, I mean, you could make a case where you're like, yeah, this is another Carson Steele like 17 carry game, and you just hope to get a touchdown out of an RB2 or like, so if you're throwing a guy out there. So we'll go back to him, I think, this week. He's interesting on FanDuel. He's 5,800 on FanDuel, which I think is, I'm not going to play him on DraftKings, but 5,800 on a FanDuel, I think is a good price for him.
That's somewhat tempting. All right. So 2 more quick things before we get out of here. And these are going to tie in as a subject, but I'm going to go to the Commanders first. So after week 1 and then a bit of week 2. So I sat here and yelled-ish. I was like, man, like Cliff Kingsbury, man, I know who Jayden Daniels is. Why won't you let him throw the ball downfield? What the hell are you doing? And it's funny, I did that early week 2, after week 2, so early before week 3. And I was watching a little bit more, and I'm pulling Caleb Williams into this conversation, and you'll see why here for a second. And I'm watching a little bit more, and I'm like, you know what? I need to apologize. And I said this to Meany. I said, I need to apologize to Kingsbury because I actually think he's doing it right. He's doing it, Daniels, get this right, and then we'll give you this. Get this right, and then we'll give you this. We're going to take steps and open up the offense as you show that what we think you can do from the college to the NFL transition is actually working. And I even go to like Noah Brown, like I think he could be the answer for the deep threat, but like it's not even so much Noah Brown. It's just that it looks like Kingsbury opens up this offense, and you can see the play calls. The play calls have been opened up downfield, more downfield threats, more wide receivers getting deep and not being purely designed things for McLaurin that even weren't hitting at time, although the one play was left on the field in week 1, as you and everybody knows. But then I look at Caleb Williams, and I'm like, they just threw the book at him. And yes, the offensive line is trash. There's no question about that. They like have you and me on their offensive line. But at the same time, I'm like, everybody's celebrating Daniels, and I think this is where I'm like, you know what? Maybe Daniels does have a chance to finish top 5, and I would bet he finishes top 5, whereas Caleb Williams might not be like a lost season, but I'm not getting too overly excited from week 4 because I think the approach that the Bears and the Commanders take is dictating a lot of the different success we're seeing between the two.
Yeah, my concern with Caleb Williams from a fantasy stance coming into this year is I didn't think he had a projectable as a rusher translated for like NFL production. Like he is mobile,
like to run.
He can escape pressure, but he's not like a scrambler. It's all like this. All of his like true rushing is like designed runs like near the goal line. He'd
wants to buy time, run around and extend the play and take another shot downfield than to actually run.
Yeah, and that's why I thought Daniels from a fantasy stance was going to be. I compared it this year the way the analogy I used, well, not analogy, the comparison was that he was a mix of what people thought they were getting from Caleb and Anthony Richardson because he's going to run more than Williams, but was going to be a better passer than Richardson. So you're kind of getting like a conglomeration of the two guys, and that's what's happened. I mean, he has on pressures. On pressures, Jayden Daniels is scrambling 42% of the time. It's like double the next highest guy. Like he's out. If you get pressure, he's out. And he did this in college. The cool thing about Jayden Daniels, and you kind of alluded to, is he hasn't turned the ball over. I mean, they're the only team without a turnover through 3 games. But even going back to college, as an 18-year-old freshman, he was an 18-year-old true freshman. He threw only 2 interceptions at Arizona State, 17 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He is careful with the football. Like that's also part of the reason why some of the downfield stuff hasn't happened for people, is because Jayden Daniels also hasn't pulled the trigger on some of those throws, because he is a more cognizant, like he protects the football, which I think they like. But you like the consistent like adjustment and the progression that we've seen. So in week 1, 12.5% of his passes went 10 yards or further downfield, is the lowest rate in the NFL. Then it went up to 27.6% in week 2. Last week it went up to 34.8%. Like like you said, it's slowly coming. It's a calibration. It's an adjustment with these guys, and you have to like the progression that we've seen from him, because you're still going to get the rushing stuff from him, because he's always going to scramble, especially when he gets pressured. So that's what we love. So I mean, I think if you took Jayden Daniels as like your back end QB1, I think you feel really good, especially in this context where it looks like Mahomes has continued to be what we kind of saw the last years. We didn't even talk, like Mahomes has 1 top 10 scoring week over his past 12 regular season games.
That's crazy.
I mean, he basically is Jared Goff for fantasy, like a better version of it sucks to say, but like that from like an archetype stance, because he's not Jared Goff in real life. He's still a good real life player, but from a fantasy football stance, like that's what we're getting. We're getting like these low A dots, a bunch of passes to get. We're not getting a lot of yards. They're not getting pushed. So like that's a bummer. Like we know the Commanders defense is always going to have them in these game scripts where they have to score points. They are number 1. My Commanders are number 1 in the NFL in yards per drive on offense and number 32 in yards allowed per drive on defense. It's like a perfect marriage. For fantasy gamers, like this is what we want. We get a mobile quarterback that doesn't make mistakes, or has not at least shown us he makes a lot of mistakes. There's still 14 games left, or 14 weeks left, but this is like the marriage. This is like the thing we want as fantasy gamers. I wish that Cliff was doing a better job with Terry McLaurin. I know that we got the 2 long plays last week, but even last week, he only ran 7 plays at right wide receiver. The one was a touchdown, Cliff. Look at, if we move our best receiver on, because right now, if you're defending the Commanders, they have one dude you're scared about, and it's Terry McLaurin. And Cliff is not doing anything creative with him still. Like I said, last week,
was it 90% out left?
Yeah.
Or
30,
higher?
still even last week. 7 routes at wide receiver, 30 at left wide receiver. Still not moving around. And then McLaurin got the 2 long balls. So we can't live that way weekly in fantasy football. Like we just can't. Like we need more of a floor. So I think McLaurin is still going to be a very boom or bust player. I don't think that we're out of the woods yet because of last week. Like there's some light bulb that went on. I think if we're forced to live that way, we'll hit some spike weeks for sure, but we need to see more like fantasy smoothing type opportunities for Terry McLaurin, and we haven't gotten those yet.
I'll give you the answer for everybody out there that might be wondering what's going forward.
I would probably trade Terry McLaurin after last week if someone was willing to pay.
That for top 20 wide receiver, because I'm glad you said we're going to be living with this, is Rashid Shaheed. Terry McLaurin and Rashid Shaheed are going to be very similar going forward. And the fact, like, Derek Carr was part of the problem with Shaheed, but he still took his shots to Shaheed. Like, there was still, he comes down with one of those, especially in the end zone, and nobody's even like, oh my God, what do I do with Shaheed? Like, this is just what happens. You can't, like you said, you can't bank on it every single week. All right. So as we get out of here, last question, definitely want to let you go. But banking on somebody that people have not been able to bank on, what they expected. If I gave you a scale of 1 to 5, how high up the scale would you go for your worries of Garrett Wilson at wide receiver?
Like a 1, a 1 or a 2. The thing about Garrett Wilson is he's had this just terrible run out of a schedule. It's not getting any better short term, right? Like they got Broncos this week, then they get Brian Flores the following week. They play the Bills the week after that, and then the Steelers and the Patriots again.
I like what we just call Brian Flores now.
Yeah, it's just Brian Flores. It's the defense is Brian Flores. It's just he's in his bag. Going back to you have to go back to week 3 of last year, and there's only been 1 quarterback to throw more than 2 passing touchdowns against the Vikings. Like he's just and we're not talking about this isn't a Seahawks situation where the Seahawks. Because I can't wait. We didn't talk about this with the Lions, but I'm excited to see what the Lions do against the Seahawks to get more of a reveal on how to handle the Seahawks moving forward. Because the Seahawks have opened the season Well, I looked when they hired Mike McDaniels. I was like, "Ooh, this is a good hire," because they have pieces I like on this defense. So I always thought they're going to be better. But they also opened the year playing Bo Nix, Jacoby Brissett, and Skylar Thompson. Like, I have no idea how to like treat how good they really are. So I'm excited that they actually play a real offense on Monday night to get a little bit more of that reveal. But you like the Vikings, what they've done defensively. It's like they played the 49ers and the Texans the past 2 weeks, like teams that we believe in offensively. And they faced the healthy 49ers minus Christian McCaffrey in week 2. So I believe in that defense. So I think the other thing with Rodgers also versus the previous iterations that Garrett Wilson's played, it's like he's just not going to get jam targets if he's not open. And now Rodgers has also missed a few times where he has been open, but Rodgers is going to also, he's the type of quarterback that's going to make a safer play too. So he's not going to really put the ball in harm's danger. He's never done that. So we probably won't see like the 35 to 40% target share games for Garrett Wilson, like a ton. It's probably gonna be more like like these matchups, like the 25% range. And that's probably what we're looking at. But I think big picture still, you feel like overly good about it, especially when you get towards the end of the year, right? Like when you come out of that and like the fantasy playoffs where you get to face like the Jaguars and the Rams, like I'll feel real good if I have him those weeks, but he's still a good player. He hasn't shown anything for like in terms of like he's not getting open or anything. He's just in probably a flatter, little bit of a target tree than we expected because Rodgers isn't a good quarterback. And then the matchups have been kind of bad. I will say though, like if we were to reshuffle up the deck and redraft today, I would take Malik Neighbors over him. I would take Malik Neighbors over him for sure. Rashee Rice, I would take over him. A couple of guys like that. So if you can pull Garrett Wilson off for like one of those guys, I think that's fine. But a lot of those gamers that ran into those guys aren't just moving them for a guy that's probably underperformed ADP a little bit.
No, 100% with you. You knew it. See, this is why you're so good. So make sure, like, if you haven't come away and realized that you need to be following Rich at Lord Reeves over at Sharp Fantasy Football, but also, Rich, I'll let you explain to everybody what you got going on. Obviously, your weekly game, like, I don't even know what to call them. Previews, breakdowns isn't enough to describe like how much you put into everybody. But like, you tell everybody where they can get your work and what you got going.
Hey, you go to startfootballanalysis.com. Like Jake said, I every week for the last decade, I've written up every game in the NFL. And because we're in a space now where like we have people that like, you know, that everyone has like a subscription service or like people are doing stuff. I try to up my game and make it worthwhile. So you can check out those. If you don't want to spend any money on a fantasy subscription, every week, the primetime games I write up are all free. So you can always just read the primetime games for free if you want to latch onto that. And then I do DFS stuff and all the other typical rankings and stuff throughout the week. I also host a weekly hangout on Sunday mornings where we talk about the slate with subscribers. But even if you want just a sample of what I'm providing, you know, those primetime games are free every week that you can check those out.
Yeah, and one of the best. Make sure you follow him. And a great hang, as always, in New York when we watch wrestling and just have fun, just talking nonsense.
Yeah. I've been playing Black Myth Wukong. I don't know if you've done that.
Yes, is that any good? Is it good?
Yeah, it's really good. But if you're a fantasy gamer and you want to, like, you know, delve into dealing with frustration and failure, it's a great game for you because you are going to die.
Oh, so it's like the Souls vein?
It's not a Souls game. I will say that. It's definitely not a Souls game. And people that I think label it a Souls light are wrong, but it's more of a boss rush game. But it's fun because like it's like a puzzle game. It's not quite like Shadow Colossus where you fill out the puzzle, but you have to figure out how to beat the boss. But it's not a Souls like. You can save. You don't play for 4 hours and lose all your progress. Because like you, I only get to play video games for maybe like a couple hours a week in season. Right. And I can't play a game for 2 hours and then lose my progress. It's not like that. You can actually save and be able to just like, if you lose to a boss, typically there's like a save thing and you just go right back and fight it and you figure it out. You're like, all right, this is what that boss did to me. I'm going to adjust and calibrate. So I would check out.
It still might have to be off season for me because I'm reading the early reviews of the new Zelda game and they're all super positive, and I'm like they're calling it a cross between the remake that they did. What was the one that it's the same art style? I should know what this is. Not Link to the Past. It was the one that was spent a lot of time on the beach. But anyway,
Wind Waker?
No, the other one. Look, now we're gonna divide. People are done listening now anyway, so it's fine. I'm gonna look up. Let's see, remake Switch. Here you go. I'm gonna find Link's Awakening.
Okay.
So the Echoes of Wisdom is a lot like Link's Awakening, but they said there's a lot of aspects that they pulled in from Breath of the Wild. So I'm super excited. Yeah, I'm super
Yeah,
excited.
and I
for that
love
one.
both of the Switch Zeldas. I think as video games, they're some of the best video games I've played. I will say I knock them as Zelda games
That's
because
fair.
because of
Yes.
some of the components that I like growing up with Zelda, especially look, I mean, I got it behind me, the cartridge, the 3D printed cartridge. You know, I
Can you see
miss
the little? Can you
the
see
dungeons,
Hyrule
right?
print right
The
here?
dungeons and the bosses. I miss that aspect.
See, that's
of
why
the,
Wind Waker
yeah.
was a really good, as you said, Wind Waker was a really good video game. It's just not really a Zelda video game.
And that's how I feel about the Switch ones. I think they're great games. I like as video games, they're amazing. Like especially the last one with the building mechanic. I forget what it was called, so I just think people are, but like where you can just like basically attach stuff to anything, like and just build whatever you want. The creativity you saw from like people on YouTube, I realized like how bad of a video gamer I was. Like where I'm just like, oh, I built like this stickman boat that I could get on, and then you like see people building like warships online on YouTube. I'm like, what the heck? Like, oh my god, I'm such a failure. Like, what am I doing with my life?
I was trying to build like a bomb trap cage thing, and then I see like this super, like you said, like this super inventive one where like it launches and the thing drops, and it all like I'm like, yeah, I my brain doesn't work that good.
Yeah, man.
It does for fantasy football. That's what we're here for. So please, if you listen this long, again, a reminder that do this. The mailbag coming out tomorrow, back for the recap over the weekend, and back next week. We'll be talking week 5 already. So good luck to everybody. Give Rich a virtual hug, and we'll see you later.